Hi everyone, and I hope that you're well on this Saturday morning. This time I thought that I would share with you a little bit about the principle of white or green space. Now, I don't know how many of you are familiar with the idea of gleaning. It's a term which is used in agriculture and stems right back from Old Testament times, and it may well be that you've heard of it in the context of the book of Ruth. Let me read this little bit from Wikipedia for you. It's just on the screen behind the phone, so excuse me if my eyes look odd for a moment. So it says here that according to the book of Deuteronomy and Leviticus, farmers should leave corners of their fields unharvested, should not pick up should not pick up that which was dropped, the gleanings, and should not harvest overlooked produce that had been forgotten when they harvested the majority of the field. And on one or two occasions that is stated in Leviticus, it adds that in vineyards some grapes should be left ungathered. And the book of Ruth looks particularly at how she went out into the fields to glean in order to be able to provide food for herself and her mother-in-law Naomi. And I'm sure it's not spoiling the story for anyone to say that the owner of that field was a man called Boaz, and they went on to marry, and it's a great story. If you're not familiar with it, then it's just 4 or 5 chapters in the Old Testament, and I'd certainly recommend reading it. The reason why I'm mentioning this today in the context of white or green space is really off the back of some conversations that I've been having with a few different people recently in terms of how we manage our time well, and leaving sufficient space in the diary to be able to respond to times where either we need some rest or other people need time from us. And if we've filled our diaries completely up to the hilt, then it's difficult to be able to respond to others and give time to them. Actually, a little while ago I was checking something on my diary on my iPad, and this is with a practice nurse at the surgery where I worked, and she made the comment, "Oh my goodness, Claire, it's all in red," because it used to be, it's changed slightly on the iPad now, but on the diary function, if you went to bigger amounts of time, so moving from a week to a month and then to a year, once you got to a year, it gave a sort of a colour coding system for how much was in your diary. And if you had no items, the date would come up white. If there were 1 or 2 items, the date would come up in an orange colour, and if there were 3 or more items, it would come up in red. And so she commented that I was all in the red, and it sort of, at the time, you know, when you have that little sort of spirit prompt that there was something significant about the comment that she'd made, and thinking and praying about it later, I realised that actually there are times where I have packed my diary so full that I find it very difficult to respond if there are people who really need my time, my energies, occasionally my expertise as a GP. But that just served as a reminder to me to put some green space, I call it, so actually physically putting into my diary blocks in the week where I try as best as I can not to overbook into those slots with additional meetings, additional even games of tennis or the gym or whatever, but to actually leave some space. And so that allows me, if it's a last minute thing, to be able to give time to others, and sometimes just to have some downtime where I haven't got a particular commitment. So where does this link in with gleaning? Well, I mentioned this to Fit for Sharon whilst we were away on holiday recently, and she was reading a book that mentioned about how the chap who'd written the book had been prompted out of the story of Ruth and her gleaning in the fields, that God was really putting on his heart that he needed to leave space at the edge of the field, leave space around the edge of his life for others to be able to glean. So that the whole principle really of gleaning was to provide a very early kind of social welfare system for people who were unable to support themselves and needed other people around. And so I think it just ties in quite nicely there, that we need to leave space, not just for ourselves, but for others, should they require us to be of some kind of assistance. And so I hope that you find that that's a helpful little analogy.